Alright everybody, the time is now and the place is here for our preliminary 2020 to 2021 winter outlook here at US Weather Action. Let's jump right into things with our ENSO forecast. We are going to have an east-based weak La Nina for the upcoming winter, as you can see outlined in these few boxes on your screen. What does that mean? Most likely you're going to have colder than normal conditions from the northern Rockies into the north central plains, with warmer and drier conditions in much of the southern U.S., and perhaps wetter conditions in the Ohio Valley as well as the Pacific Northwest. That's a typical La Nina pattern. It's also important to note that this is the first La Nina since winter 1718, so this is a first year La Nina. Looking at precipitation anomalies, you can see that typically results in above average precipitation in the Pacific Northwest as well as the Ohio Valley into places like northern New England. It's not as dry in places like the Mid-Atlantic as a second year La Nina, so that's important to note. Now let's look at weak La Nina snowfall anomalies. Generally, you see slightly above average snowfall from the northern plains into the Great Lakes and into northern New England. However, this is very, very slightly above average. A few inches doesn't make a big difference up there, where the seasonal averages are much more than in places like the Mid-Atlantic, where you can see about average snowfall is typical with weak La Ninas. Now let's look at the La Nina and the NAO. The NAO's North Atlantic Oscillation is the second most important teleconnection that impacts our winters here in the U.S. Generally, a central-based La Nina results in a positive NAO based on this study, and an east-based La Nina, which is what we were expecting, however, it could propagate westward, so we're going to have to watch that. But an east-based La Nina typically means a negative NAO, so that could be big. A negative NAO opens the door for colder than average temperatures in much of the Great Lakes, the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic, and quite the opposite is normally what you see with a positive NAO. And also, we are going to have a slightly negative PDO for the upcoming winter, as you can see here on this graphic. Now let's look at our winter anomalies. This is always what we look out for, the winter outlook. You can see our analogs include 5 different years actually from the past 15 years. I like to look at recent analogs versus analogs from like 60, 70 years ago, just because things have changed since then, of course, with our climate. So you can see our really only area of slightly below average temperatures extends from the Pacific Northwest and into the northern Rockies, perhaps the northern plains. Other than that, you see above average temperatures in our analogs here across all of the southern U.S. as well as much of the eastern U.S. Now, it's not as above average in places like the Ohio Valley as it is in places like New England and the Gulf Coast, so that's something to note as well. As far as precipitation goes, you can see based on these years, with these weak La Ninas or moderate La Ninas, we see above average precipitation from the north, pretty much the northwest, and also in places like the central Mississippi Valley heading into the Ohio Valley, and also into the northeast. Now, it's more so slightly above average in the northeast, in contrast with pretty above average actually in the central Ohio Valley. Then you have your southeast ridge, of course. That's classic La Nina, shown by those below average precipitation anomalies in much of the central and southern Mid-Atlantic as well as the southeastern U.S. That's just typical southeast ridge, which is what you see with a La Nina, so that makes sense. Now another thing that I like to look at is our recent winter trends. What have we seen in the past 10 years? You can't ignore this. And it's actually pretty similar to our analog maps. So you can see much of the southern U.S., a good portion of the eastern U.S., has been above average in the temperature department, with really the only area that's hung on to average temperatures in the past 10 years being in the northern plains as well as the northwestern U.S. As far as precipitation goes, it's actually very similar to our analog years, with that above average precipitation being seen in the Pacific Northwest as well as places like you see the entire Ohio Valley as well as much of the lower Mississippi Valley, and then really the only area of below average precipitation has been in Florida for the most part. So that's what we've seen in the past 10 years, as well as also you could say California and places like New Orleans, but that's so that's what we've seen in the past 10 years. So it's actually pretty similar to our analogs here. So, you know, that raises our confidence for what we could see this upcoming year. You always want to see more support for your forecasts. So that is something to note. Now let's get into our official temperature, precipitation, and snowfall forecasts for the upcoming year. This is our preliminary winter outlook. Now, it really lines up with what we've seen in the past 10 years, as well as those analog years. And also, of course, your classic La Nina pattern. So really, our only areas of slightly below average temperatures are expected to be from the Pacific Northwest, as well as the Northern Rockies, you know, and that makes sense, heading into the Northern Plains. That's where we could see slightly above average temperatures. Now, why is this only contained to the Northern Plains? Well, that's just what we've seen really in the past 10 years, and that southeast ridge is going to keep things pretty locked up in the southeast. It's going to be difficult for these troughs to maintain strength as they move east in the eastern U.S. You know, they're going to be very moderated by the time they reach the coast, okay? And then we have our area of average temperatures from, really you can see all the areas where there's actually no shade. So from places like Northern California to the northern, well, I guess it would be like the North Central Rockies. And then also extending into places like Denver, Kansas City, Omaha, Nebraska, the Western Great Lakes. All of these areas can expect about average temperatures relative to normal. Of course, we're going to have, you know, things go up and down. Of course, you're going to have times where it doesn't line up with this. But as a whole, I think this is what we can expect for the upcoming winter. Now, a large area of above average temperatures is likely for the upcoming winter, okay? And this will be slightly above average. So we're going to have, you know, the yellow means slightly, and the orange means more so almost well above average, okay? So this area of slightly above average temperatures extends from much of California, heading into the Central Rockies, into the Central Plains, as well as the upper Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. I thought about extending this area of above average, or more so well above average temperatures, into places like Virginia and perhaps far north as like Philadelphia. But I think we're going to hold on. I think we're going to hold off on that for now. Okay, just based on the analogs and also the anomalies, and the fact that this is going to be a weak La Nina, but an east-based La Nina as well. Because if we do see a negative NAO for much of the winter, then that's why I only have slightly above average temperatures in places like the upper Mid-Atlantic, just because that could throw things off. And then we have our area of well above average temperatures for much of the southern U.S., really the whole southern U.S., you know, and into New England. New England's another area that, as you can see, we've seen pretty above average temperatures in the past 10 years, as well as on the analogs. So that's why I have that area in well above average temperatures. Now, it's not going to be last year, okay? Last year was like 5, 6, 7 degrees above average as a whole. It was warm. It was record warm for many areas. I don't think we're going to see that. Just because you're in the darker orange, you know, that doesn't mean that we're going to have, you know, a repeat of last year. However, it still means that you're probably going to be on the warmer side of things relative to normal. Now let's look at precipitation. This is basically a La Nina pattern with things like an east-based La Nina and a first-year La Nina factored in, as we explained a few minutes ago. So you see those areas of well above average precipitation in the northwestern U.S. from Seattle to Portland, as well as the central Ohio Valley from places like Cincinnati to southern Indiana, and just north of Memphis. I think that is where we are going to see an active storm track set up, really this upcoming winter. So we're going to have plenty of mixed events from places like Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, New England. We're going to have a lot of events that start as snow and then change over to sleet, freezing rain maybe, and then head over to rain just as that low pressure moves to your west. And that will be pretty frequent in places like State College or Harrisburg, Philadelphia, New York City, Albany, all these cities in the Northeast. That's where we're going to have pretty frequently this upcoming winter, as these low pressures either track over your head or go slightly to the west of you. And also now all these unshaded areas, that means about average precipitation. And then our below average precipitation areas extend from southern California into southern Arizona. And then you can see that southeast ridge completely shown from New Orleans to Atlanta, Charleston, Columbia, Wilmington, all of the basically nearly all of the Carolinas, as well as Southeast Virginia. And that really lines up with our analog maps, as well as just the classic La Nina pattern. It's going to be a pretty dry winter in those areas because we're going to have that southeast ridge kind of, blocking that area from having those low pressures move through. So that explains it. Now let's look at snowfall. This is what a lot of you probably came for, and I would advise watching the rest of the video because I know you skipped. But anyways, let's look at snowfall now. We have a large area of above average snowfall from the northern plains heading into the Great Lakes, and into far northern New England, as well as the Pacific Northwest. I think that's going to have, I think those areas are going to see above average snowfall, just because the storm track is probably going to go from like St. Louis to Cincinnati to Pittsburgh to Albany. Could be a little bit further south than that. Could be a little bit further north. Once again, it depends on teleconnections like the NAO and the PNA, which are much more difficult to predict than the ENSO. So we're just going to have to see on that kind of thing. But, of course, north of the low pressure typically sees snow, probably 100 miles north, and anywhere near and south of low pressure sees rain. So that's what impacts these anomalies on the East Coast. So below average snowfall looks likely from especially south of New York City to Philadelphia, DC, heading down I-95 into the Carolinas. I'm much more confident on below average snowfall in areas south of DC than north of DC. However, I looked up, of course you want to look up what the analog years produced, and, especially winters like 11, 12, or 7, 8, if those winters happen, if this is a repeat, then yeah, that's why you'd see below average snowfall in places like southeast PA, southern New Jersey, southern New England, especially far southern New England. So, lastly, we have our area of below average snowfall in the southwest. I'm not going to outline like the individual ridges, but of course, that looks to be the case. So, this has been our preliminary 2020 to 2021 winter outlook here for the U.S. Once again, if you skipped through the video, we had a lot of interesting graphics, so I'd advise going back to them, probably graphics that you actually haven't seen before, okay? So feel free to go back. But anyways, everybody, thank you for watching. Feel free to subscribe to the channel. Once again, we're going to have many more winter storm videos this winter, as well as our official winter outlook. This has been U.S. Weather Action Forecaster Josh Adams, everybody, here on September, I think it's the 13th. Everybody, thank you for watching, and stay tuned.